The following video is a collection of stories from 3 videos on my personal channel, Chills. The link is at the very top of the description if you want to check it out, as well as my Twitter and Instagram links. And last but not least, do you like these scary story videos? Let me know in the comments with a simple yes or no. And if you're feeling generous, please leave a like because it helps the video do better. Let's get into the stories. Chills. Number 1. So I still remember this happening so vividly. It was terrifying to the point that I had to move rooms as I was too scared to sleep in my original one. So here's the story. It's a long one. The houses in this suburb were back to back, so basically there was a street, a line of houses, a fence sectioning them off, another line of houses, and then their street. The backyards were what touched each other, so you could basically climb your backyard fence and land in your neighbor's backyard. This is important to understand the layout, so I apologize. Towards the back of the house was the laundry room and then my room with a large glass door leading outside. It had windows on the side which sat on a concreted side passage that connected the front of the house to the backyard. My bed was pushed against the wall with the window above and next to it. 9-year-old me was a night owl. As a young kid, I used to pretend to go to sleep and wait for the all clear, then turn on the lamp and read my books. This particular night, it was windy, so you could hear the dry leaves being blown up and down the side passage. It was around midnight when I heard the leaves shifting and moving around outside a lot quicker than before. The noise was growing louder and louder, and it seemed to stop right by my window. The house is older and is on stilts, so my window would have been 2 to 3 feet off the ground. I heard a bang against the wall, then a scraping noise. I froze sitting in bed as that noise came from right behind me. I panicked as the scraping was more and more frequent, and I turned the lamp off and did what every child would do in that situation. I retreated under the covers and hid while listening. My heart was pounding. I can still feel the fear to this day. The noise stopped and I heard a crunching on the leaves as whatever it was walking away. I was trying to gather the courage to run to my parents' room, which was at the front of the house, but that meant I had to walk past the glass door. Then I heard a thump up the stairs to the back door, then the clamoring of the wind chimes. They were metal and hung low. Whoever it was could not see it in the dark and must have knocked them as they were peering in the door. I heard them grab it and throw them to the ground. This was followed by tapping and scratching, and they even tried the door handle. I screamed to high heaven, hoping Dad would wake up. I heard the person clamber away, so I got up and ran to my parents' room. Woke up Dad in a panic, declaring someone is outside. He took off with a baseball bat and no pants like the knight in shining armor he was. I don't know how long it was, but he came back and told me he could not find anybody and I should go back to bed. I refused and slept in the lounge room that night. It got to a point where I was so unsettled my parents had to shift all the rooms around to move me from that room. It was only years later when I was 20 and we were at a family dinner talking about things we did when we were young. I brought up that story. My dad turns to me and says, since we don't live there anymore, I guess I can tell you that I did find someone that night. He found our neighbor Bill, whom was the father of one of my friends from school. He was trying to climb over the fence when Dad caught him, and the first thing he said to my dad was, "Oh, did something make him scream?" Dad refused to tell me what happened after that. But that line chills me to this day. He found his ladder on its side near my window in the morning, which of course he did not tell me about either as the creep was trying to climb into my room. Number 2. So around 10 to 12 years ago, I lived in a little 2-bedroom house on a long road. It is a terraced house on a long strip of other terraced houses. Back in the day, all the attics were joined and you could literally travel through them. Years later, they realized it was a bad idea, fire spreading, burglars, etc. And so all the attics were bricked up so each house was secure. One night, I was soaking in the bath when I heard a noise above me. Thinking it may be an animal or something, I just ignored it. This went on for a few weeks, only it was getting to the point where I could only hear the noise when I was in the bath or shower or getting changed. This went on for a few weeks, but it was getting to the point where I would only hear the noise when I was in the bath or shower or getting changed. I got a friend to check the attic and he told me he didn't see anything. He just stuck his head inside, which just confirmed my animal story. Not much happened after that for about a month or two when one night I was alone. I was getting ready to take a shower as I was heading out with friends. I heard the same noise above when all of a sudden the dog started going crazy, barking and looking directly above me. Clearly I was freaked out and decided to get ready at a friend's house. The next day I was outside my house when the neighbor shouted me. Now my neighbor is creepy as hell, small, stinky, strange looking with a hint of crazy in his eyes. He asked if I was okay. Being polite and trying to show him he doesn't really bother me, I said yes and went about my business. Just as I got to my door, he asked if I got to my friends okay. At first, without thinking, I just said yes, thank you, smiled and waved goodbye. When I got inside my house, I realized that he would not know I was out of friends unless he heard me on the phone, and as I was so creeped out the night previously, I was practically whispering to my friend. Anyway, I rang family members, told my dad, and they all came around. They turned the lights on in the bathroom but kept all the other lights off. Opened the attic door and you could see two lights shining right through to the top of the attic, two tiny little holes. My bathroom ceiling was quite dark so I never noticed them. My dad went in, he was gone a while, but when he returned he was blazing angry. He ignored everyone and walked straight outside to the neighbor's house. We heard him shouting for the neighbor to open the door but he was not home. I asked my cousin to go up to check it out. When he came back down, he told me that the wall separating the attics had been knocked through. Most of the brickwork was on my side, so it was knocked through from the other side. We called the police, but they told us there was no proof he had done anything. The neighbor told the police he never used the attic, and the previous tenants may be to blame. Clearly, he was to blame, the old dirty pervert. I don't think I have ever been so disturbed knowing that the dirty pervert had been watching me for all that time. I never stayed in that house again. Number 3. Okay, so a little bit of a backstory. I am a 19-year-old male, was about 10 when this took place. I spent a large part of my childhood living in a town called Renfrew, Ontario, Canada, with my mom and her fiance at the time. It was a pretty average-sized town, calm, peaceful, and a relatively nice place. We lived in a house on a street that I believe was called Stewart Street. Life was pretty normal for the most part. Our driveway and our neighbor's driveway were both connected, so we had to park beside each other and both houses were pretty close to each other. I never saw much of my neighbor, other than the occasional time he was in his backyard, probably tending to his garden. He was a middle-aged man, probably 40 or 50, and he never said hello or acknowledged me or my family when we looked at him or walked past him in the driveway. Everything continued as normal as ever, until one night when I headed into my room to go to bed. My room had one window, and it faced out towards the driveway. I had blinds, but they were always slightly open so I could see through the open gaps. On this night, as I lay in bed, I could hear crunching in the gravel on the driveway. I never thought anything of it and assumed it was probably my mom's fiance outside doing something, but no, I was very wrong. I turned over in bed to face my window, and as my eyes slowly adjusted in the dark, I could see through the gapes of the blinds that there was a pale face looking through my window, staring directly at me. I made eye contact, and I couldn't look away. I was so horrified that I almost wet the bed. I tried to scream out for my mom, but I was too scared of him hearing me and breaking through the window. He continued to stare, but it was almost as though he was looking off into the distance towards me, like someone who was zoned out. Finally, he slowly raised his head up to the roof, and he started screaming at the top of his lungs, "Shut up, you birds! Shut up! Shut up!" The second he started screaming, I got chills. The creepiest part of it all was that there were no birds chirping, no noise, nothing other than him. His screaming was so serious and so full of rage that it felt as though he was legitimately enraged by these imaginary birds. Somehow everyone in the house except me managed to sleep through the screaming, which went on for almost the entire night. I did not sleep a wink, and that man didn't leave my window until about 4 a.m. When morning came, I was far too scared to tell my mother about what had just happened. I just went about as I usually did. The door we entered the house from was in the backyard, which meant when we left we had to walk through the driveway. Usually my neighbor was never outside, but one day while I was walking to the school, he was standing in the driveway about to get in his car. I did my best to look down and avoid him. walking as close to the wall of my house as possible, when I noticed out of my peripherals that he was standing completely still, holding his car door open, watching me walk. My eyes naturally darted towards him, and I could see his eyes watching me, full of something I can only describe as intent. His nighttime screaming continued, always telling the birds to shut up, occurring about every other night. On the nights that he didn't show up, I had chronic nightmares about him opening my window, and my grades started to suffer. I was in a constant state of terror. Eventually, I realized that I had no choice but to tell my mom what was going on. I woke up after one of my nightmares and went into her room and told her about our neighbor. She attempted to assure me I was only imagining it and I was only dreaming. The rest of the story is from what my mom told me years later when I was much older, because I was too young to hear about it. After I told my mother about what was happening, she and her fiancé decided they should closely pay attention to our neighbor. One night they were having a few drinks and playing frisbee in the backyard. My mom threw the frisbee and it landed on the grass in our neighbor's yard. My mom walked right on over into the yard. There was no fence separating us, and picked up the frisbee. It had landed quite close to the neighbor's window. She bent down to pick it up, and as she stood back up, she caught a glimpse in the window into the kitchen of the house. The entire kitchen counter was covered in porn magazines. Sex toys were strewn about. My mom and her fiancé started freaking out, assuming he was a pedophile or something, and they marched straight to his door and started banging on it. The door had a window, and they could see the neighbor through it in the hallway, but he looked different somehow. He turned around, shocked by the loud banging, and revealed a face covered in makeup. Bright red lipstick, mascara, women's clothes, etc. The man was a cross-dresser. Normally, it wouldn't be such a big deal, but there was something clearly wrong about this man. Every alarm was going off, and my mom felt as though he may have someone in his basement or something. He ran away and then came back and answered the door a few minutes later, face washed and regular clothes on. My mom and her fiancé flipped out on him, asking him why he was screaming at my window, what was with all the porn, etc. I was never told what he replied to all of this. My mom called the cops and they ended up coming and searching his house. Inside they found tons of child porn. I have an idea of what that man wanted with me, but I have no idea what he was on about with the birds. Clearly he had some sort of mental condition. All I can say is that I am so glad I don't live there anymore. I have a few more stories of that town, because it was full of creeps for some reason, but those are for another day. Number 4. This actually happened to me when I was younger. Here it goes. When I was 10 years old, I was seriously into spy stuff. Anything to do with spies, I wanted it, and that was that. I had a little notebook besides my bed that I would write all of the car registration plates in my estate down to keep track of everyone and to identify potential intruders. I never did find anything interesting, but in my young mind, I was the next Harriet the Spy. Love that movie. I used to share my spy activities with April, the girl next door, because she indulged them and seemed to enjoy snooping about with me. My mom had bought a set of binoculars during the Celtic Tiger because, well, she could. Once I discovered these, I used them to constantly look at the birds up close in the sky, at people far down the street, and of course, into my neighbors' houses. The neighbor directly across from my house was a single man in his 40s who very much kept to himself. I would sometimes watch him through my binoculars, but he was boring, would always just sit in his bedroom. April and I would make up stories about his house being haunted, and we'd freak ourselves out so much that at least one of us would go home, pretending to feel unwell. When April suggested that we ditch the baby crap and become real spies, I was intrigued. The plan was to sneak into our creepy neighbor's house. That was it. We were only 10, we had no agenda. Creepy neighbor always left his kitchen window open, even when he was at work, so we climbed in. It was 4 p.m. in the middle of July. It was hot, sunny, and we were very much alone in this man's house. I always get this feeling of pure terror whenever I enter a premises I'm not supposed to be in. It's the stress of being caught and has always freaked me out. Anyway, I remember feeling that sort of fear, but April was jitty and jogged up the stairs. I waited in the kitchen, eyes fixed on the frosted front door, and half imagining creepy neighbor's shadow to suddenly appear. Michael? I could hear April's voice weak stamper my name from upstairs, and I immediately didn't like it. I had to get out. I quickly climbed out of the kitchen window and ran back across the road, leaving April alone in the creepy neighbor's house. I knocked at April's door and told her grandmother, who she lived with, where she was. Relief washed over me as I watched the small, fat, old woman waddle across the road to get her granddaughter. Before she reached the front door, April burst out wide-eyed and crying. My mom would not tell me why the police came, but I secretly watched with the binoculars from my bedroom window as they made creepy neighbor's dull, quiet house come to life with lights and loud talking. I looked into his bedroom where two policemen were standing side by side staring at the wall, at pictures on the wall. I will never forget that moment when I finally got those binoculars into full focus and saw myself in a framed photo on creepy neighbor's wall. I was in my own front garden making a daisy chain. I must have been only about 2 years old. That's when I noticed the others. There were about 50 pictures of me at all different ages on my neighbor's bedroom wall. He was arrested at work that day, caretaker in the local primary school. That's all I can remember from that time. April and I never spoke again after the incident, but she still lives next door to me and has her own daughter called Leah. It still shakes me, 14 years later, that while I was out spying on all the neighbors, there was one spying on me, and I never knew. Number 5. I'm so scared right now. I don't know how many of these are true, but if anyone has ever experienced anything like this, please let me know because I'm shitting myself. Here's some background. I'm 24. I live in London in the flat I grew up in. It's a huge split into 2 flats. One is council and one is owned. The flat upstairs is a sort of rehabilitation house, so my neighbors are always changing. Usually if someone doesn't react well to living in the real world, they're taken back to the hospital and I get a new neighbor. I've actually been pretty lucky in this sense and haven't had any problems with anyone. So about 4 months ago, Daniel moved in. Now occasionally, mostly if a new neighbor has been involved in a crime, I'll get a visit from a social worker of some sort explaining that if any previous problems arise again, to call said number, blah blah. This tends to happen if they've had a violent past, although they never divulge any real personal information about the crime or the neighbor. Anyway, so he moves in and for about the first week, I don't hear anything from him. I usually make a point of being friendly with my neighbors, considering we share the same building and they usually have some mental issues. However, every time I knocked for him, there was no answer. Eventually I gave up and slipped a note under the door, explaining who I was and telling him to let me know if he needed anything. 2 days later, I was coming home from golfing with some friends when we met in the hall. He seemed nice enough. Obviously, this helped me to feel better about the situation, and after our chat, I felt more at ease. We had a lot in common. We shared a lot of the same interests. We were both huge Arsenal fans. I explained that I had just been golfing and he told me how he considered himself a golfer too. I reiterated the note telling him to let me know if he needed anything. I felt so much more at ease as I went to bed that night. Writing this all now seems so messed up, but I guess I have to explain the story. So anyway, long story short, we got closer during the next 2 weeks or so. He'd come around to watch the footy at mine a few nights after work and shared conversation over some beers. He told me about rehab. He explained that he'd previously been in a toxic relationship that had driven him close to insanity. It was strange because I've never been so open with a neighbor. As accepting as I was of the upstairs residents, I usually keep my distance. But although I could never personally see myself getting into a situation like Daniel did, I felt like I understood his point of view and feelings. He seemed like a nice guy who had a bad thing happen to him and became emotionally unsteady for a while. We ended spending a lot of time together. When you live in the same building, it's so easy to end up doing so, but it's not something I dwelled on. We got along really well, liked the same music, football teams, sports. It was good. So anyway, one day I came home after a long day at work. My boss had been a dick all day. I was tired and wanted to sleep. Daniel must have heard me come in because he came to his door and asked if he could come in. I told him I wasn't really up for it. He looked a bit disappointed, but I had just had a shitty day and I just wanted to go to sleep. When going to bed, I noticed something really weird. This literally gives me shivers now thinking about it. There was an imprint of a body on my sheet, like someone had just been lying there. I just kind of stared at it. I racked my brain, but I knew I hadn't laid on it since I made it this morning. In fact, I hadn't even remembered making it. Regardless, I was just too tired to really care. I just pulled back the sheets and went to sleep. Over the next few weeks, I saw less of Daniel due to a number of reasons. Work, other commitments, and generally, I felt like I needed space. We'd gotten very close and that was cool, but especially being in such a close capacity, the friendship seemed a bit too intense. I did feel bad for Daniel. He hadn't done anything and I'd blown him off for quite a bit, but I needed my own space. One night, I brought a female friend home from a night out, as she lived far away and buses had stopped running. It was around 4 in the morning, so I tried to be quiet as I walked in the communal hallway. As I was unlocking the door, I heard footsteps in my flat. I was high at the time and freaking out, but didn't want to freak out my friend. I grabbed a golf club from my hallway and crept into the kitchen where the noise was coming from. I turned on the light and ran in, and Daniel was there. He was just sitting on my counter smiling. I swear to God, I've never been so freaked out in my entire life. Obviously, I asked him what he was doing in my kitchen at 4 in the morning, and he said something about borrowing some milk. I asked him how he got in, and he went silent. He asked who my friend was, and the tone. It's hard to describe, but it was like he was my wife or something. It had a kind of jealous pang to it. He left, and me and my friend made our way to bed. But this is the weirder part. My bed had been laid in, but fully laid in. My TV was on and my wardrobe was open. How long had he been in there? The next morning I couldn't shake it from my head. It was so weird that it was too weird. I wasn't sure whether or not to call the social worker. In hindsight, I should have then and there, but I didn't because I completely avoided him. I think he knew he overstepped the mark because he didn't try to talk to me either. So that brings us here. The other day my mom called. She was asking about work, etc., and I told her I was thinking of quitting. Not to go off track, but my boss is a prick. He was keeping me on late, underpaying me, and just generally taking the piss. We ended the conversation and I went to bed. Fast forward to 2 mornings later, today, I go to work, my boss isn't there. I'm happy, going about my day, until a close colleague approaches me. He tells me the boss was hit with a golfing club last night and is in the hospital. Now I feel bad for feeling happy that he wasn't in. He's going to be fine and they've got 2 suspects, but they haven't revealed who they are. As I said, my boss is a dick, so as bad as it sounds, I'm hardly surprised he has a lot of enemies. So I came home tonight feeling a bit chirpier as I'd had an easy day at work. There's a letter through my door from the social worker telling me to call her. I do it and she tells me Daniel's been arrested. Writing this, it seems as if it was obvious the whole time. But you've got to understand that life isn't like a film. You don't expect this shit to happen to you. Yeah, maybe someone on the news in some faraway American town, but not in my flat in London. She tells me she can't tell me anything else, but I just knew. By this point, I'm freaking out even more. I went upstairs and just kicked the door down. I've never done anything like that. It was just something out of a film, but my body was pumping with adrenaline, and I needed to know what was going on. Oh my God, it makes me sick to write this. I'm alone in my flat and I'm scared. I'm 24 and I'm scared to be in my house. I went into his room, directly above mine. There's nothing that out of the ordinary. It's a lot like my room actually. Wardrobe, Arsenal posters, but there's one weird thing. There's a camera pointing down at the floorboards, but it looked like he just put it down there, so I didn't think anything of it. But above it were tapes. I had no idea he made films, but looking closer, all the boxes had my name on it, and things I did, aka talking to mom, watching TV, with girl. My stomach is twisting at this point. I'm just thinking, please no, please no. I switched on the videotape and there it is. A clear gap between the floorboards that focuses on my bed. It's just above my wardrobe, so I never spot it. Obviously, I called the police. They came straight away and I finally found out the truth about his past and his toxic relationship. He had stalked this girl that he went to school with, and she had to move before he was finally admitted. The police had just left and I'm alone in my flat. My neighbor has been watching me for 4 months from a hole in my roof and I just found out. I'm terrified. Chills. Number 1. So at this point I'm just looking for help or someone to tell me I'm not losing my mind. My wife went to Atlanta to visit her folks and brought the baby with her. Grandma and Grandpa are stoked to have time with the grandson. I get to play Diablo 3 all week and everyone wins. The wife only asked I take care of a few things around the house. Namely, she wanted the bedroom painted. So last night, around 1 o'clock, after several hours of fighting off demons and zombies and various other minions of hell, I decide to prep for painting before I go to bed. I move the dresser drawers, nightstand, and lamp out of the bedroom and head out to the garage. The garage, by the way, is still a complete mess. I've had the house for 4 months now and I just never got around to fixing up what the foreclosure process did to that section of the house. I dig through some stuff to get the brushes, paint cans, and trays out. Then I hear it. It was faint at first, but it was definitely coming from the attic. It sounded like crying. I look up and the door to the attic is hanging down ever so slightly. I had been worried about squirrels getting in there since we moved in, so I decided to investigate. The door drops down with a sudden and rather loud slam. My dog gets pissed off, scared by this, and decides to charge into the garage barking. Only he doesn't make it the whole way. I hear him scamper and howl the whole way from the living room into the laundry room. But when he gets to the doorway between the laundry room and garage, he slams on the brakes. Now this little guy is a Boston Terrier pug mutt that I rescued, so he is by no means a ferocious beast. But I've never seen him scared. He proceeds to piss the floor and shake violently. "Benny, what are you doing?" I'm not really mad at him, but I probably yelled louder than I should have. He looks up at me with fear in his eyes and keeps messing the floor. I pick him up and take him into the living room, grab a towel, and start to wipe up the mess. He slowly and apprehensively follows me back into the laundry room. I walk back into the garage with a Hurley Irish field hockey stick and flashlight. He stayed in the doorway again and whined at me, imploring me not to go up. I don't know what I expected to see, a raccoon, but what I saw froze me in my tracks. I had only made it 2 steps up the ladder, barely sticking my head into the attic, when I saw her. Clear as day, there was a girl in my attic. No older than 6 years of age, she sat in the fetal position in the corner of my attic. Her head was buried into her knees, and she rocked herself slowly back and forth. She wore a long t-shirt that I assumed was her pajamas. It looked tattered with age. She was whimpering quietly to herself. I probably wouldn't be able to even discern the sound if not for the fact that I had been stopped dead in my tracks, holding my breath, my heartbeat echoing in my skull. After what seemed like forever, she looked up at me and our eyes met. Her eyes had deep bags as if she had been crying for years without sleep. "I'm so hungry." And with that, she was gone. She didn't disappear in a puff of smoke or anything. Just 1 second there she was, and the next she wasn't. It was if I was watching a movie and it simply jumped from one frame to the next. I'm not really sure what I saw, but I can only assume it was a ghost. My senses slowly came back to me, and I proceeded to tear the hell out of there. Benny and I ran into the bedroom, slammed and locked the door. I sat in my room with all of the lights on for about an hour. I was almost ready to scope out the situation when I heard her start crying again. It was very soft and I don't know how, but I could sense that she was actively trying to cry quietly. It was almost as if she was embarrassed and didn't want to be heard. "I'm so hungry" reverberated in my head. I could almost hear her say it. It was as if she was talking to me in my head. I didn't feel scared. I got out of bed. Benny decided to continue to hide under the covers, and I went into the kitchen. I made a small bowl of Easy Mac. I poured a glass of milk. I walked into the garage. I flicked on the garage light and was greeted by silence. I already felt foolish, but it seemed even more foolish to leave the food on the floor, so I flipped a hamper upside down and made a makeshift table. I left the food on the hamper in the middle of the garage like some sort of preschool offering. I left the garage light on and slowly backed out to the laundry room doorway. I honestly expected to see her tiny, malnourished frame climb down the ladder that I had left open. But after a few minutes, I started to think how ridiculous I was being. I was sleep deprived and overstressed from too much Diablo and work. I could hear Benny crying and immediately felt bad for scaring him so badly. I went back to the bedroom and tried to soothe him, but it turns out I didn't have to. When I got there, he was wagging and seemed like his old self. I can't explain it, but the house felt warmer, less burdened. I don't know. I was gone maybe 2 minutes, but when I got back to the garage, the food was gone. I mean gone. The bowl was licked clean. I stared at it, dumbfounded, and took the dishes back to the kitchen and put them into the sink. I didn't get much sleep that night. In my dreams, I could see her. She thanked me for the food and asked for cookies, dolls, and chocolate milk instead of regular milk. On the way home from work today, I picked up some Chips Ahoy, more Easy Mac, chocolate syrup, and some cheap Barbie knock-up. I put them in the garage, and when I got back from walking Benny, I returned to a similar scene. Cookies decimated, no crumbs, Easy Mac gone, bowl licked clean, but the doll was missing. I know a lot of these stories ends with a dramatic twist or shocking revelation, but I don't have one for you guys. I don't hear her crying. I don't hear anything from the attic, but I know she's happy. I can't explain how, but I know it down to my bones. I'm equally as sure that she'll talk to me in my dreams again tonight. My concern right now is how I explain to my wife that our family just got a little bigger. Number 2. My wife and I decided to do some spring cleaning this weekend, as we do every year around this time. We moved into this home in the late 80s and have engaged in our spring cleaning ritual for the past decade. The house is too small for us now, but my wife wanted to wait until our youngest was off to college before moving. I've learned over the years that arguing with her is pointless when it comes to matters like these, so I have kept quiet and patiently waited for that day to arrive. Paul starts college this fall, so I'm hoping that this will be our last spring cleaning at this house. I have become efficient in this ritual over the years to the point where I have become less of a pack rat during the calendar year. The basement, which used to be the biggest hassle, had little to no clutter this year and was cleared out in only a few hours. The garage was the next area of interest and took the remainder of the evening. My wife's job every year was to clean the attic. She would spend the day locked away in that room and would return around dinner time with a few large bags full of things. I was already curious to where the things came from because I could never recall a time where either of us had ever gone into the attic. I personally hadn't stepped foot in the room upstairs in over a decade. More than usual this year, I said to my wife as she carried the last 2 things from the attic. "It's been a busy year," she smiled, tossing the bags into the last empty bin outside. "All done?" "Almost. Just a bit more, but I can get it done tomorrow." "I can." "That's okay," she said, kissing my cheek. "I can get it." I stared at her with a curiosity that was new to me. This was always such a strange time each year. I remember how frantic she had been when she first brought up spring cleaning. It was strange because if I recall correctly, the house wasn't even that cluttered the first year. She always wanted the attic, which is probably why I've never gone up there. I don't even know what's in the attic. I decided I was gonna go look, but I couldn't do it while my wife was home. She was always so protective over the attic. The next morning, she said she needed to run to the store. I kissed her goodbye and read my newspaper at the breakfast table. I watched her walk out to the car and pull away. Once I was sure she was out of sight, I put down my paper and rushed to the attic entrance. My heart pounded as I pulled the attic stairs down to me. I felt dirty spying on my wife's attic, but part of me felt scared. We were so honest with each other in our relationship. This attic seemed to be the only secret. I have no idea why I never checked before today. I stepped onto the first stair of the ladder and the cold air from the Arctic rushed over my face. Cold air? From the attic? My pulse quickened as I climbed the ladder. A low rumbling sound filled my ears as I neared the opening to the attic. My eyes peeked into the room and opened in confusion. The floor was a bright white laminate, and the room was surrounded with fans. The fans were attached to large coolers which seemed to be connected by piping. I walked to one of the coolers and opened it with a reluctant pull. The container was full of ice water. That explains the cold air. I assumed that each of the coolers was filled with the same, and the pipes ran the water to each from the main line. A metal table sat in the center of the room near a boarded-up window. My chest felt like it would cave in on itself. My breath circled my face in pillows of vapor. What is going on up here? A small metal case sat in the corner on top of a metal stand with wheels. To the right of the case sat a box of latex gloves. I opened the case and swallowed the lump that formed in my throat. Sharp objects lined the inside of the case. It reminded me of a surgery kit. Every instrument was spotless and shining. I looked around the room and noticed that everything was polished. My mind ran with images of what this room could be used for, and they all starred my wife in a dead body. I pictured her with a mask over her face, cutting into a young girl as she cried for her mother. My wife, carrying bags of severed limbs to the garage after storing them up in our attic for months at a time. There must be a better explanation for this. My eyes searched the floor and noticed drains under each cooler for the first time. I crawled on the ground and peered inside the drain, unsure what I would find. I used the light from my phone to light up the inside of the dark drain and gasped at the sight. Blood. I heard a car door slam and leapt to my feet. I rushed to the attic entrance and almost fell through the opening. Keys rattled against the door as I secured the attic door above me and ran to the kitchen. I was putting my plate in the sink as my wife entered the room. "You all right?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, breathing heavily. "Why?" "Looks like you've been running," she laughed. She walked over to me and gave me a hug. Her eyes narrowed as she pulled away. "You're freezing." She knows. I had to think fast. "I must be getting sick," I said, attempting to give her my best sick face. "You do look a bit pale," she frowned. "Yeah, I just found out that my wife is a serial killer. I'm just gonna go lay down." "You do that," she said. "I'll finish cleaning the attic." The words made me shiver. What did she need to finish exactly? The room was spotless. Okay. I lay on the bed and closed my eyes. Visions of victims screaming while my wife cut into them like lab specimen filled my dreams. Blood poured from the wounds she inflicted as the screams deafened me. I watched as my children took the place of the victims. One by one, my wife murdered our children until it was finally my turn on the table. I woke in a cold sweat with my wife staring at me from our bedroom doorway. Her eyes were cold and menacing. "Honey?" I asked nervously. "You went to the attic." "No, I thought I told you to stay out of the attic," she cried. Her reaction wasn't what I expected. She seemed sad, but I expected anger. "What is going on?" "I can't let you leave," she sobbed as she pulled a syringe from behind her back. "I'm sorry." She lunged at me onto the bed. The needle pierced my thigh, but I was able to use her momentum to toss her off the other side. Blood trickled down my leg as I ran to the front door. I heard a gunshot ring out as I turned the corner to the living room. Tears rolled from my cheeks as I sped out the front door as a second shot nicked the frame. I ran across the yard, waiting for the next shot to take me out, but it never came. I disappeared in the trees behind our neighbor's house, and only when I was out of sight did I look back. My wife sat crouched down on our front doorstep with my gun in her hand, crying. The police arrested my wife, and I watched them carry the coolers out of the attic for evidence. They found pieces of a young boy who was reported missing a few weeks prior. I looked into my wife's eyes and I couldn't recognize her. She looked at me with regret. A fear in her eyes swelled into tears as the car pulled away. I woke up the next morning and turned on the television. Every news station was playing the same story. My wife, the serial killer. I felt dirty in my own home. How could many people meet their end in my attic? The police were already estimating that it could be in the dozens. The thought made me nauseous. I grabbed the box of cereal from the cupboard and poured myself a bowl as I watched the footage. The pundits were discussing how I could have possibly not known about these things occurring in my own house. I thought the same thing. I grabbed the milk from the fridge and opened it. I glanced down to the bowl and stopped as the first drop hit the paper that sat in my cereal. I grabbed the note and unfolded the paper. My heart pounding in my neck as I read the words, "It's Paul you should be afraid of." Number 3. When we first moved into our new home, about 14 years ago, we all felt really comfortable. It was a really nice house, with a basement and attic, 3 bedrooms, 3 baths, and plenty of rooms for offices, entertainment centers, etc. Perfect, because we had just had an addition to our family 3 years prior, my babysitter Abigail. And for you listeners with multiple children, you know just as well as I do that a family with kids needs a lot of room. We made use of every room in the house, except for the attic. The attic was just a simple attic. We never went up there. I remember the only time I ever really saw up there was just a few feet surrounding the open hatch. Well, my dad was on the ladder with a flashlight. The only thing out of the ordinary was that the rest of it was shrouded in an almost unnatural darkness. I didn't pay attention to it. I was 7 years old. I didn't understand the significance of the darkness, nor associate anything with it except a passing thought of, man, it sure does look scary up there. Anyway, the house was beautiful but unusually noisy. You know, those cliche bump in the night noises the house makes. And you get scared and your parents tell you that it's just the house settling. Those kind of noises, except a lot of them. We paid it no attention, and for years, we dealt with it and eventually grew used to it. Just your normal happy family living in a somewhat creepy home. 14 years passed and now we're at the present day as of last week. I moved out about a year ago and now I'm in a relatively decent apartment and attending college. My parents has recently told me that they plan on selling the house. They asked me to write up a summary about the house's details, history, accompanying property, etc. Of all the years I lived in that house, none of us really cared for the history, and the agent who sold us the house never really mentioned it. We were too awestruck by the great deal, so out of a newfound curiosity, I started researching the property. It seemed relatively normal. One odd thing is, however, the previous owner's husband had disappeared, and after authorities searched for him for months, he was presumed dead. The wife and her teenage daughter were distraught and could no longer stay in the house where they once lived together as a family. That's when they moved out and we moved in. I decided that after I finished the write-up, I would research the previous owners just a little bit more. After about 3 hours, I finished up what I thought was a quality summary and emailed it to mom and dad. Then I decided to do a little research on my own. You heard the previous owner's story, but the previous owner's story and the previous owner's story I found to be a little more fruitful and frightening. The property was originally a farm, settled on around 1895. The farm was expansive and successful. The family owned the farm for many years, until around 1934, during the Great Depression. In order to keep a steady stream of income, the farmer who owned the land leased and sold most of his property. Funny thing is, the people who would buy the property or use it always either ended up dead or missing, under mysterious circumstances every time. No witnesses would be present, as everyone on site would be either dead or, as previously stated, missing. I started turning to the farmer's daughter, Maggie. Maggie had grown up on the property and thought of selling the property was the most awful thing she could think of. Unable to face the harsh reality of the severe depression, she was the only one of the family that protested selling or leasing any of the land, and that was made very clear to buyers. Police interviewed her parents, all of whom had said she had been acting very strange. isolating herself to her room for long hours, skipping out on meals, typical teenage rebellion thing. Turns out, upon reviewing the evidence and searching Maggie's room, they found several items associated with old-timey black magic. Unable to make an arrest for witchcraft, the police had no further evidence that she was guilty of or associated with the murders of the property buyers and leaseholders. The family sold the farm in 1950. Maggie had long since passed away. The house came under new ownership, and the house was completely remodeled. By this time, only 5 of the original 300 acres remained with the main house. The main house is the house that my family ended up in. In 1951, the owners of the house, including their 7 and 10-year-old children, were reported missing. Police documents stated that, upon entry, the house smelled of rotten eggs, blood, and smoke, the sources of which could not be found in the lower levels of the house or the basement. Upon performing a thorough search of the house, the last place left was the attic. Here the bodies of the entire family were found, including the children. They had been mutilated beyond recognition, so badly that the images were not released for public viewing. No suspect was found, and no witnesses were present. The murder remains unsolved to this day. Needless to say, the house was put back up on the market and resold multiple times. The owners up until their family had all experienced strange noises and moved out fairly quickly. 1 year, 2 or 3 years the longest, besides our family having stayed for 5 years. All of these residents had no odd experiences other than the strange noises or the sense of being watched. Then the previous owner's husband went missing. I got curious as to what the attic looked like today. I returned home to visit for the weekend, and while my parents were out grocery shopping, I told my sister, now 17, about the history I had found. I'm all about this creepy shit, she said, and we have to go to the attic. Although I was tempted to convince her otherwise, I was too curious to deny her request. We went upstairs in the attic. What we found is why there was next a Roman cohort's worth of authorities parked in my yard. All these years we had never looked in that attic, and apparently, neither had police when they were in search of the previous owner's husband. That's where we found him. There was the body. It was just bones by this time, and the forensics team told us that they were surprised we didn't notice the smell during the initial stages of decay when we first moved in. I was surprised too, because upon entering the attic, we were greeted with a rather awful stench. As the two who originally discovered the bodies, and with me being a criminal justice major with heavy ties to our local PD, they allowed my sister and I to see the official report and evidence gathered. According to official reports, the victim had suffered blunt trauma prior to the murder. She had knocked him out. There were, upon closer examination, bloodstains leading to the ladder of the attic. She had dragged him up to the attic, all by herself. Near the body were candles, bowls filled with strange ingredients, and other strange books and artifacts. Autopsy revealed that the victim had suffered severe lacerations to all of his limbs, as well as his face and genitalia. The bowls were printed, and no prints were able to be lifted. The victim was tested, and he was confirmed to be the previous owner's husband, as everyone very well knew already. The previous owner was now a prime suspect, but no one could contact her. The murder had taken place close to 15 years ago. Her whereabouts, her condition, and her intentions were and are still unknown. I was dumbfounded that we had been living in a house with a dead guy just upstairs, and we never knew. I got curious yesterday and researched the previous owner. Eventually, I found her in Images, a newspaper from when the case was still hot. When I saw her face, my jaw dropped. Remember all of the research I did on the house's history? Well, images of all of the owners were included in that search, including one of Maggie when she was about 20 years old. The picture was dated 1941. Maggie, who was supposed to have passed away in an automobile accident in 1947. Maggie, whose face I was now staring at on my computer screen. Why did she do it? Was she making a sacrifice or something? I know it was her. There was no denying it. I know she killed the other owners as well, or used her dark magic or something to harass them out of the house. She was a witch. How could she live to be that old but look so young? Was she still killing owners of her old property? What kind of supernatural help had she enlisted to aid her in her killing spree? And most importantly, where is she now? Number 4. First things first, this is my first time ever visiting this website. I never even knew it existed before this morning. I was directed to this forum by a friend of mine who said this would be a perfect place to share my story. It's a story about a box that I found in my attic. A little backstory about my home, built in 1954, having one previous owner. It sits basically in the middle of nowhere, in a quiet town of about 100 people. The closest property to me is approximately 1 mile away. I bought this house because I wanted to get away from all the big city madness that I had been living in for the past 35 years. I've lived in the house for roughly 3 years now, just me and my dog. I live quite the lonely life, but I'm fine this way. I wouldn't have it any other. So the other day, I was up in my attic fetching some summer patio furniture that I had up there. It's a pretty creepy space, no lights, very tight and narrow, and basically a hot box. I do not like being up there one bit, just gives me the heebie-jeebies. I got my furniture out of there as quick as possible and scurried on out of there, but not before I tripped over something on my way out. It was a box. I've never seen this box before. It was this rusty old metal box that it was locked shut with a padlock. It was not anything of mine that I had owned or put up there. Kinda baffled me, but I figured maybe it was something left behind by a previous owner that I had never seen before. I take the box outside and decide to attempt to pry it open. It was pretty heavy. I shook it a couple of times, and it just felt like a brick in there. I took a saw to the lock and finally got it open after about 10 minutes. Inside the box, it was literally just a brick, but attached to the brick was a letter, which read the following: "Hello there, friend, you found my brick. It doesn't belong to you though, so put it back where you found it." I just kind of laughed for a minute and thought that's kind of weird. I didn't put it back though. I actually threw it outside behind my garage and scrapped the box. Fast forward to later that evening. I was sitting in my living room when all of a sudden I hear a loud crash in the kitchen. I go over to check it out, frightened as hell, and see that my kitchen window had been smashed. Shards of glass all over the floor, and a brick laying there. It had a note attached to it, and it said, "This is what happens when you don't put things back where they belong. Get the fuck out." I'm totally freaking out at this point. I never even told a single person about the brick I found in my attic. I had no explanation. Mind-boggling. I went outside to see if there was anyone around, but it was literally dead silence, as I live in the middle of nowhere. No footsteps, car engines, anything. Meanwhile, my dog is back in the house, barking at the stairs that go up to the attic. What the fuck? I'm really bugging. Do I dare go up there? It's creepy enough as it is. Don't know what to do, so I call a buddy of mine over. Waited outside till he got there, and we both go up there together. We both have our flashlights and are peeking around to see if we can see anything, when all of a sudden I see a note tacked to the wall that said, "Put my brick back." So freaking paranoid. I stayed at my buddy's house for the weekend and planned to go back in the morning. Number 5. When I was younger, just on the cusp of being a teenager, my sister and I were in the attic. We were hunting for some old toys we had stored up there that we wanted to pull out and give a run for their money. It was a simply designed attic, old floorboards, steep old roof, everything bare to the eye. That's why it was so bizarre when we noticed the small cubby door on one of the walls, logically leading to what would have been the outside of the building. Being the curious creatures we were, we just had to open it. The long and narrow crawl space we discovered defied imagination, How was it possible for it to be there? It violated everything our young minds knew about space and architecture. And so I ran off to get my dad while my sister stayed and watched it just to make sure it did not disappear while I was away. When I came back with him, he was just as stunned as we were with the discovery. After pondering it for a short while, we all knew there was really not any choice. We had to know what was in there. Getting down on our hands and knees, we went inside to investigate the seeming impossibility. We found more attic, the same decor, just more walls, and a much larger space, filled with shelves and storage containers. It was utterly fascinating that it was filled with all manners of things, art, tools, appliances. We wondered how it had all gotten there. Some of it could have not even been physically brought in, unless it had been built from scratch in that space, or the building was erected around it, such as a matching washer and dryer. But even stranger yet was that my father began to recognize the things stored there, things he had lost, things he had thrown away over the years, renewed and in prime condition. These were his things from the years of his life. It was amazing. We vowed to come back in the morning and remove everything we could because there was so much history, nostalgia, and genuinely useful objects held there. The next day came, and for some reason, we all seemed just far too busy to go back. It will be there tomorrow, we all said, and the next day, and the day after that, we barely even thought about it, as it slipped away from our minds like a fog. Before too long, only a few weeks out, I was convinced I had dreamed the entire thing, and no one spoke on it anymore. I did not even bother looking in the attic. That was how far removed from reality the idea was. Time passed, and my sister and I grew into our 20s. We both moved away, and she had kids of her own, both of us married. Unfortunately, tragedy struck, and my father fell ill. We both had to return to care for him and prepare his estate for the inevitable conclusion of his terminal disease. It probably comes as no surprise that this put us both in the attic again. Mainly, things needed to be organized and removed, and it probably comes as no surprise that when we were there, we stumbled across the same cubby door we had seen more than a decade prior, and in that instant, we looked at each other and remembered. We could see it in each other's eyes. We had both forgotten for no reason. We were determined to not let it go to waste again. I told my sister I was gonna go get some boxes so we could start moving things out, and she agreed to go inside and start gathering what she could to bring out. I had just left the attic when my phone rang. Answering it, my mother came on from the other side in hysterics. My father had just passed away. I went back to get my sister after hanging up, no longer concerned with pilfering the strange room, numb from shock, except the door was gone. I stared at the wall where it had been, feeling the terror of betrayal. I began to scream and yell hysterically for my sister, but there was no answer. I clawed at the wall and took a hammer to it, only to eventually break through to the aluminum siding of the house, creating a hole I would later have to patch to sell the building. I had no idea what to do. I did not even think I could realistically call the police. I had no idea what to tell them. Eventually, I gathered myself up and went to the hospital to be with the rest of my family, expecting them to ask where my sister was. They never did, not even her husband, ever. A few years have passed since then. Every once in a while, I see pictures of my sister around my house, and I remember that once upon a time, she existed. Sometimes I think I made her up, or that I'm misremembering a stranger's face in those old photos. No one ever came looking for her. No police, not her job. No one acknowledged she was missing. When I asked my mother, she would stare blankly at me, and after some prodding, slowly nod. She remembered, yes, I had a sister, and that was as interested as she got. My sister's husband gave me much the same reaction. He would ask me who I was talking about when I mentioned her name. Eventually, he would concede that he seemed to recall being married at some point, and his lack of conviction would make me think I made it all up. I probably did. Either way, he has a new girlfriend and his children are calling her mom. They have never missed a beat, but sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night because I hear someone walking in my attic. I hear a voice I think I recognize, but I can't place who it belongs to anymore. She asks for me to help her, but I don't even know why I would be helping her or what I'm helping her do. Either way, she's in the attic, and there's nothing in my attic, so it must be my imagination. I just wish I could stop hearing her voice after I wake up. Chills. Number 1. This weekend I got a chance to stay with my uncle for a bit. We never really talked much before then, but this weekend I learned so much. It started over dinner. We made small talk. I complimented him on the food, and my aunt said he learned all he knew from the asylum. My ears perked up a bit. Were you like, in an insane asylum? I laughed. No, he laughed. I worked with the people in the kitchen. Cooking helped calm the people, but I also sometimes had to deal with all hands on deck situations. This really perked my interest. I've always been interested in insane people. I'm not sure why my mom never mentioned her uncle. He's our great uncle, worked at the asylum. Maybe she didn't know either. I immediately asked for a story. I told him I could handle the worst of the worst, but he didn't want to go to that. He told me this story and a few others, but I just want to tell you all one for now. Story 1. It was October 23rd, 1967. I remember the date because it was a week after your aunt gave birth to your cousin Leroy. I was working in the kitchen with some of the easier guys, the ones whose treatment was working. We lock up the knives and everything, obviously. I would get up each morning and pre-cut everything so we didn't have to get the knives out at all for anything. It took away a lot of flavor, but it was the safest thing to do for obvious reasons. That morning I got in and grabbed the knives out and began to do the prep work for the day. I was always alone in the kitchen. Nothing seemed out of place at all. I went along whistling and talking to myself. Then I went to pick up one of the paring knives and I couldn't find it. It was in the set a minute ago, but now it wasn't. I figured I had dropped it and began looking around for it. I could not find it. See, when things go missing, your mind instantly thinks of how you must have lost it. You forget what you're doing or where you are and get annoyed with finding it. I did this, but then something said in my head, go tell someone. That's when it hit me it may have been stolen. I had learned my first year that insane people have a way with going places they shouldn't be and magically disappearing. It's our job to make sure they don't disappear out of the asylum into public. But this, a knife, it could be deadly. I ran outside, locking the door behind me in case whoever it was still in there, and ran out to tell someone. The whole place went on lockdown. Everyone and everything searched, but we couldn't find the paring knife. At this point, everyone, and I mean everyone, was accounted for. We all went into the kitchen and searched. No knife. They asked me if I knew for a fact it had gone missing. To prove it, I showed them a potato I had peeled that morning with it. We all agreed that was weird, but I'm sure you know that sometimes things can literally disappear into a void. I blamed myself and offered to pay for a new knife and apologized for the inconvenience. But we all agreed that safety of the staff was the most important. Still nervous, I asked for someone to help me in the kitchen, just in case there was an unaccounted for crazy lurking, I don't know, on the ceiling or something. I actually looked up to see if there was something or someone up there. One of the guys felt bad and hung out with me. Probably an hour into it, we were joking. I was feeling much better when we went into another lockdown. Over the intercom, we heard for everyone to stay where they were and keep the doors locked. That was different. Lockdowns usually meant you do that until the place is cleared. Why the clarification? Me and the guy I was with kept working away. When we were done, we were still in a lockdown. I phoned the front desk and a weird voice answered. Insane asylum, full of creeps and geeks. How can we screw you over today? I looked at the phone and hung it up. I basically thought at this point we were all in trouble. In 1967, we didn't have 911, so I phoned the local police and let them know that I thought the asylum was in a great deal of trouble. We waited in that kitchen for about 4 hours before a police officer showed up. He asked us to open the door. Me and my friend looked at him strange, as if wondering if it was real. We both held knives behind our backs, looking a bit crazy. Then we saw the head doctor with blood all over his coat, and he said, "Let them in, boys." We opened the door. So naturally we begged to know what the hell happened. One of the employees had stolen the knife when I was washing some lettuce in the sink. He waited for the all clear, then began opening the cells of the crazy people and trapped all the workers in the closet. One of the insane people stole the paring knife and killed him, then went around attacking other insane people. My call saved a lot of lives. Without it, and being in that room locked, I'm not sure how long those men would have been trapped, and how many of the insane would have died by one stupid paring knife. It was a truly terrifying day. Number 2. First of all, I want to thank you all for your kind words in response to the last story I told. I'm excited that all of you are excited about this series, and my uncle is impressed by the response, and has said he will tell me more stories as he remembers them. He did mention that some of them were very traumatic and he would rather not talk about them, but he knows some old coworkers that might also be willing to share some. We've got lots of stories for this series. I'll try to post one a day if I can, but if I don't have any stories from him, I won't be able to. Patience is key. Let's get into it. Story 2, The Mumbler. Back in 1973, political correctness was non-existent, so we had names for all of our patients. There was one we called the Mumbler because he used to mumble around as he walked. He was harmless, but some of the things he would say were the most screwed up things you'd ever hear. The way he stood Vincent, it was downright creepy. He had his hands pulled in, like a picture of someone being paranoid, wringing his hands constantly, and it was pulled up to his face as he mumbled. He'd walk the halls aimlessly and mumble. The nurses and doctors used to tell us if any of the crazy people made conversation to play along, act like we were right there with them in the struggle. When they heard voices, we heard them too. I used to play along sometimes, but I don't work with the true crazy people much, and when the Mumbler joined the cooking classes, he was pretty well useless. He stood there and just mumbled. One day I tried to see if he would join. I walked up to him and realized right away he soiled his diaper. He smelled absolutely awful. Now don't get me wrong, I cared for these people. That's why I was there. I called a nurse and out loud said he shit himself. Most of the time these crazies know they are crazy and don't care when you say stuff like that, or more than likely are totally oblivious altogether. This guy screamed so loud it was ear piercing. Shit, 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 I shit. This scared the others. He kept repeating it over and over. The nurses gave me a mean look and took him away, screeching the halls how he shit himself. I knew this was one of those guys that was probably found painting the walls of his house with his own feces. I didn't think anything about him other than how weird he was. Crazy people are crazy, and yes, it was out of the ordinary, but not really when you consider the experiments these people went through. He never came back to class after that. 6 months later, I was walking the halls and saw him again, without a nurse. I figured he had gotten out. I asked him where he was supposed to be. Even though you know for a fact a crazy person isn't dangerous, you still need to make sure you just don't walk up to them and grab them. I knew this after years of getting attacked by them. I kept my distance and he didn't respond, he just mumbled. I listened to him and I could make out this. Mama, I killed Mama. Daddy, I killed him too. Jerry, he hurt me first, he had to die. But Sissy, why did I kill Sissy? My heart skipped a beat. I realized he was counting on his hands. When he got to his sister, it was like he was actually wondering why he had killed her. I kept listening. Wife, you leaked red. Why did you do that? Baby, your head was full of worms and gum. I had to let them out. I had to eat them so you would be safe. I wasn't sure how to handle this situation, but I was pretty sure the Mumbler was a guy who snapped, killed his whole family, and turned his brain into mush. I looked at him and said, Harold, buddy, let's go see the nurses. He looked at me with black, beady eyes. His hands stopped moving because he stopped counting. My heart started racing. He looked at me and said, Why do I kill? When will the voices stop? Like I said before, the nurses always said play along. Harold, what are the voices saying? God, I knew this was a loaded question. Kill. They always want me to kill people. They told me we are all trapped, Bill. He grabbed his skin when he said trapped. This guy was being told we are trapped in our bodies, and when we die, we are released. I don't think he was trying to discuss philosophy with me. My heart started racing more. His hands went to his sides. He had no weapon, but he could still attack me. I had to think on my feet how to distract him and get the nurse's attention without escalating the situation. Harold, let's tell the voices together to shut up, I suggested. He nodded. Let's yell. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Together we screamed shut up for about 10 seconds. The nurses came running, took him, and detained him. He immediately began struggling as they were so rough with him. He repeated shut up over and over. Then he just screamed over and over. They put him in a straitjacket and hauled him off into his room. I obviously needed to write a statement for the incident. I let the doctors know what I did, and the head doctor praised me and said, I handled that very well. Never ever approach a crazy person with the idea they are going to be calm and collected just because they've been through therapy. The doctor closed his door behind me and asked me to sit down. Do you know why he is here? He asked. Of course I didn't, and I told him. He was normal like you and I, but when he came back from Vietnam, his mind never left the war. One day he just snapped. He started screaming and killed his entire family. He looked at me and paused. I knew there was more. They found him, Bill, eating the brains of his child, his baby Bill. I looked wide-eyed at him and said, What the hell? Remember how he talked about worms in the head of his baby? He turned around and looked at the window. War is tragic. He is one of those people we can't help. We can't kill him, so he sits in the hospital heavily sedated, counting the people he's killed. I'm not sure how he got out, but if he is ever unattended or given a weapon, I don't know what he will do. He grabbed a pen off his desk and toyed with it for a bit. Bill, sometimes I wonder if we'll end up like him. One day you're a normal guy, the next you're a psychopath walking the halls of an asylum, defecating yourself and counting all the people you've killed. Sometimes I wonder. He paused for a minute. If they are just better off dead. I looked at him strange. No, Doc, you and I are sane. I think there's more than just trauma at play. He's probably genetically unstable. You and I won't end up like that. And they are worth helping. I always felt like I needed to be the voice of reason. Asylums were for the better. If nothing else, it kept the crazies off the street. He leaned in on his table and looked at me square in the eye. Bill, the reason we keep people like him here isn't to help them. It's to study the brain and prevent others from becoming like that. He pointed off to the side. This hit home to me. He was right. Only a few of us there actually cared about the truly insane ones. Vincent, it still makes me sick to think that doctor thought that low of those people. A vet who went crazy, now shitting his pants every single day, and that doctor just saw him as a science experiment. What the hell? Number 3. For reference, my name's Eric, and I had a best friend named Axel. Not anymore, as you could probably guess from my wording. Axel and I were childhood friends, best friends. We lived on the same street, and by the time we were 5, we were inseparable. At least according to our parents. From reading the title of this story, you guys are probably thinking something along the lines of, how the fuck did Axel get into an insane asylum? Let me make it clear right now, Axel wasn't insane. Sure, he was a sarcastic son of a bitch, but he was a normal teenager. I've read some of the stories here on No Sleep which describe some people just not being right from the moment they're born. Axel wasn't like that. He was a perfectly normal and happy kid, straight through kindergarten to his senior year. It wasn't his fault, it was all mine. 2 years ago, right after graduation, Alex and his parents were heading over to his grandparents in Los Angeles to celebrate him going to college. It was a 6 to 7 hour drive. We live in Northern California, and they wanted to arrive early in the morning. They barely left the city when a drunk driver T-boned their car, a full tractor trailer ramming into a tiny Honda Civic. Both of Axel's parents died on impact. The doctor said it was a miracle that Axel even survived. At first we were hopeful. Somehow Axel had managed to avoid any major spinal injuries. With therapy, he would be able to walk again, move his entire body. It didn't look like his brain had been damaged so that he would be unable to function again. If he woke up, he would recover. The thing is, he never woke up. The first week was understandable. By the third week, we were begging the doctors for some sort of explanation. They could never find one. Theoretically, he should have woken up. There was nothing wrong. Needless to say, I didn't react very well to the accident. Axel's father and mother were basically a second set of parents to me. Axel himself was more like a brother to me than a neighbor. My real brother was already studying on the other side of the continent. For the very first time I could remember, I was alone. Of course, I still had my parents and other friends and everything, but Axel had always been there, a constant presence. Sometimes a warm blanket and other times an annoying pest that wouldn't leave me alone. But regardless, he had always been there, and to see him disappear was a little more than I could take. Axel in my mind had always been a strong individual who wouldn't let anything stop him from getting his way. Seeing him unresponsive in some hospital bed didn't seem real. That said, you could probably guess I wasn't exactly thinking straight for the next few months after the accident. Had my mom not driven me to my new college and dumped me on the sidewalk, I probably wouldn't have gone at all. It's only a 30-minute drive from my house. 5 months after the accident, Axel still didn't show any signs of waking up, and nobody knew why. As I said above, I'm not a computer person. After the accident, I didn't really touch my crappy 2011 Chromebook unless I had to type up a paper or something. My Skype account and Facebook were basically untouched until I shit you not, this year. If someone had to communicate with me, it was either through phone or my Yahoo account. And even then, I checked my email on average twice a week. That's probably the only reason why I clicked on that email. Now that I look back, I should have immediately moved it to my spam box. But because of my stupid human curiosity, I didn't. The email itself was not special or extravagant enough for me to post here. The only thing in the message box was a link. The sender was some sort of no reply sort of thing, and I thought the link would just send me to some sort of other site that I hadn't heard of yet. Instead, it just sent me to some sort of chat room. You know Cleverbot? It was basically that, only without the logo. I remember explicitly moving my mouse over to the X on the tab when a line of text appeared. Do you want to save your best friend? That scared me. I hadn't really discussed Axel's accident with anyone, not even my family. The people who really did know the situation knew that Axel probably never was going to wake up. The only conclusion I could really come up with was that it was some asshole from my high school that decided it would be funny to play the sick joke on me. So, with my grand typing speed of 45 words per minute, I told the guy to fuck off. I was surprised when I got a response almost immediately. I can help you. I shouldn't have kept going, but I was tired and already pissed off at my English professor, so I did. If I remember correctly, it was something about how making fun of a person induced in a coma was a really shitty way to pass time. Once again, I got another response which completely ignored my obvious lack of enthusiasm. I can bring him back. Because I didn't have anything else better to do, I asked him what he wished to bring back. I wish I didn't. Alex's soul. Just putting it out there, I'm not a religious person. Though I wasn't a hardcore atheist, I didn't really believe in things like souls and other crap like that. Unfortunately, the chat, however, had me intrigued. Whoever was behind this knew Axel's name and that I was his best friend. What an elaborate prank, I thought back then, as I promptly told the other guy to stop spamming me. Why do you think Axel's not waking up? That was the line that really got me, and one of the reasons why I can still remember this chat verbatim 2 years later. I stood up so fast that my chair was knocked over. The pain of Axel trapped in that coma was still ever present, and despite all my beliefs, I started to wonder in the back of my head, what if Axel wasn't waking up because his soul wasn't there? His body was perfectly fine, at least medically, so it would make sense that he wasn't awake because he was missing something else, something like a soul. Almost as if the person behind the screen could see me, another line of text appeared without me replying. I can save him, but I need your help. Not suspicious at all, right? I wish someone was there back in my dorm to tell me to my face back 2 years ago. But back then, all I could think was, what if he was telling the truth? What if this wasn't some prank, and this guy really could save Alex? I was desperate, and 5 months of pent-up emotions weren't really helping either. I remember asking the person behind the screen specifically, "This isn't a prank, right?" "No, I will bring back all of him. I just need your help." And then I typed, "All of Axel? All of Axel's soul?" I wish I paid more attention to that thing's reply. "I will bring back all Axel's." What did I have to lose? Now I realize I had so much to lose, but of course, now it's too late. What did you need me to do? I need your approval. That should have been the gateway, but it didn't click in my stupid clouded mind. The possibility of saving Alex, I was willing to take it. If it was something as simple as my approval, who wouldn't do that for their best friend? Who wouldn't want to save their best friend? The word okay barely left my lips when the line of text appeared once again on that white text box. "Your contract has been approved." I didn't even stop to wonder how the person knew I said okay when I didn't even type my reply. All I could do was jump when I heard my phone ring. I recognized the number immediately. It was the hospital Axel was staying in. I will never forget the receptionist's voice over the phone as she explained to me how Axel woke up, how he woke up screaming and clawing his throat, how by the time I arrived at the hospital and looked into his eyes, I didn't see Axel anymore, how he never stopped screaming, even when the doctors gagged him to prevent him from biting his tongue off, how every time I saw him from then on, I saw a completely different person looking at me through his eyes. I thought that Axel's had been a typo. Only when I saw that text on my phone did I really realize how wrong I had been. See, I brought all of them, just like I promised. To this day, I'm still not sure what I did. I screamed at my phone for a reply. Hell, I even drove all the way back to my dorm and screamed at my laptop. I never got a reply, and Axel never recovered. He was awake, but it wasn't him. Eventually, they had to move him to an insane asylum because they couldn't get him to stop screaming. From what I hear, they had to cuff his hands and feet with some sort of padding to prevent himself from scratching his throat out. I only visited him once, and that was a year and a half ago. I still can't get rid of his screams from my nightmares. And now, here I am, 2 years later in a completely different dorm with a less shitty computer and a somewhat better mental state typing to you guys because I'm scared. I just got a call from the asylum. Axel wants to talk to me, but I'm not sure if it's even him anymore. Number 4. I want to start this story off by saying I am a 22-year-old guy living in a small town in upstate New York. My name is Kevin. I won't use my last name for obvious reasons. My father, Steve, was a doctor and a brilliant man. He also died to save my life. Just a little over a year ago, I was desperately broke, not a penny to my name. You see, although my father had money, he really had more of the just because I'm rich doesn't mean my kids are rich kind of attitude. Sure, he'd buy me food and give me a place to live, but he never bought me a car or paid for anything that wasn't necessary, like going to a concert with friends or something. But he did do one thing, and that was find me a job. I was 100% against it when he first told me about it. Being one of the biggest doctors in our area, he had tons of connections to the community, especially in his field, so his grand idea was to have me work at a psych ward. Father of the year. Well, anyway, like I said, I was 100% against it. "What are you, crazy?" I think were my first words in my response. $25 an hour was his response. That was enough for me to break, especially when my bank account balance was looking like a string of Cheerios. Before I said yes to him, however, I needed to know what I had to do. He told me I would basically be a janitor, to which I scrunched my face at, but that $25 an hour was too tempting. "How the hell did you get me that wage? Do you know the guy or something?" "Sure do," he said. "Bob Conti. I already talked to him on the phone yesterday. You walk down there tomorrow and tell him that Guinea, your pops, says, lay off the gold chains." I was never going to say that to him. The next day I rode my bike the 6-mile journey to Williams Asylum. The bleak, white-painted building had no life to it. It gave a crawling feeling to my skin. The front doors creaked when I opened them, the peeling paint crinkling under my fingers. I was immediately greeted by a 30 to 35-year-old woman sitting in a small lounge area. "Hello," she said in a bubbly tone. "How can I help you?" she said, smiling. Hi, my name is Kevin." Hi, I'm Kevin," I said uneasily. "Yeah, so I think I'm supposed to meet with Bob Conti?" "Oh yes," she said. "Bob is in his office right now. If you follow me, I can bring you to him." "Okay," I said as she was standing from her desk. She walked in a calm fashion, her high heels echoing off the corridor halls, clacking on every step, her brown hair bouncing along with her rhythm. A little overdressed for the job, I thought. "Bob," she called out down the hall to the approaching door. "Bob, you have a visitor." She paused. "What's your name again?" she asked nicely. "Kevin," I said. "Kevin is here to see you," she said through the door. "I'm Tammy, by the way," she said in a quieter tone to me. The door opened moments later with a tall man standing on the other side. "Hello there, Kevin," he said in a tired voice. "How can I help you?" "Yeah, my father talked to you on the phone about starting work here. He told me to talk to you," I said, unsure of the actions to take next. "Oh, right. Well, first off, I should start by showing you around the place," he said, leaving his office. "Your main job will be feeding the patients and washing the bathrooms, and generally just keeping things clean around here." "Feeding them?" I questioned, uneasy of the task. "Well, really, all you have to do is put a lunch tray through the feeding slot in their cells. It's not like you're spoon feeding them," he explained. I gave a sigh of relief. His way of speaking of the patients gave me chills. He referred to them almost as animals. "Conti, is that Northern Italian?" I asked, trying to get to know him a bit. "What's that?" he said with a twist on his face. "Conti, that's Italian, right?" I asked again. "Oh, Conti, I thought you said Monty," he said jokingly. "Yeah, Northern Italian, good guess." I laughed and asked him to tell me a bit more about the job. There are only 10 patients here, one of which is in 24-hour solidarity. Not to tell you, but I must tell you, he is a murderer. He is clinically insane and not allowed in prisons, and under no circumstances are you to ever talk to him. He is very manipulative and violent. Please, for your own safety, if you ever have a concern or question about him, come to myself or Tammy, he said with a serious look in his eyes. I could instantly feel the direness of his words. "I understand," I said with a gulp. "Okay, anyway," he said, "right now the other 9 patients are in their rooms, and will get to come out a little later for their nightly hour of common room time. Believe it or not, most of them play board games, while a few play with the imaginary bunnies that walk around with them. It will take some time getting used to, but trust me, it's not as hard as it sounds." "I guess I'm going to have to take your word on that one," I said. "This is the common room," he said as we rounded the corner to a small room with a few tables and chairs strewn around it. A few different board games on the shelves. "All you have to do is sit right there for about an hour and make sure no one kills anybody." My jaw dropped, unable to say anything. I'm kidding. The other 9 inmates are all non-violent. They have 0 records of physical altercations. They've got some foul mouths though, so be ready for that," he reassured. He showed me the bathrooms and the holding cells and the rest of the grounds until finally the tour was over and we were back at his office. So most of the time I'm in my office, doing the paperwork for invoices and making sure I've made the orders for food shipments and whatnot. You know, ownership stuff. Anyway, you can always talk to Tammy if you need anything. She's usually at her desk. Think of her as your sub-boss. "Welcome aboard," he said with an extending handshake. What do I do now?" I said in an unsure voice. "Talk to Tammy. She will run you through the specifics," he said as he slowly closed the door. I walked down the winding, confusing hallways, finally making my way to Tammy's desk. "So?" I said. "So this is more than half the job," she said with her arms extended to the side. "Sitting on your ass and waiting for the day to end." "Wait, really?" I asked skeptically. "Yup," she said. "You're looking at it." "So what am I supposed to do?" I still asked. "You know what? I can let the patients out early tonight so you can see how that works," she explained. "Bob shouldn't mind." I agreed since I really had no other choice. We walked back down the maze of corridors to the long narrow stretch of hallway extending from the common room. The long hall had 5 doors on each side, all identical, solid and white with a tint of yellow from the aging. Each had a small slot in the door which led to a tray-like feature on the other side. The decaying tiles on the wall had faded colors of a pale brown. Tammy walked in front of me, jingling the keys in her hands while opening the first door on the right. "Here's old Jackson," she said as the door creaked open. A shadowy-eyed man with gray hair slowly rose to his feet, his back hunched and purple bags sagging from the hollow sockets dug into his skull. He seemed to hardly have the energy to saunter by me, with an indifference to my existence. I was overwhelmed with feelings when I saw my first patient. The next few doors were the same story, shells of human beings walking down the narrow hallway, dead-eyed and distant. Zombies. On the sixth door, finally, there was a change. An older black man with an obvious scar running its length down the side of his head. He had short hair and one whitened eye. His appearance shocked me at first, but later intrigued me. I was desperate to know what happened to him. "What's up, man? I see you looking at me, dog." The man spoke in a quick manner, his words spitting from his mouth. He stood to his feet and walked by both Tammy and myself, still bantering about his stories. I had 6 tigers, 4 lions, 17 mountain lions. You know, the ones from the mountains, not the ones from Africa, homeland. Shit, man, lions and tigers and bears. Tammy interrupted him. I assumed she was sick of his ramblings, as was I. "That's Rick. He probably won't answer to that, though," she said. "Damn straight I won't answer to that. Scar's the name," he said with a twisting face. Tammy rolled her eyes. "Moving on," she said. Cell 7 and Cell 8 had 2 older women who seemed to be very twitchy, flinching and ducking at things that weren't there, and eventually sprinting down the hall. Anne and Kate, she called them. Cell 9 had a young woman with fiery eyes. She had a tight muzzle strapped around her face, muffling her screams. Her eyes pierced straight through me with terror. Tammy had to practically drag her from her cell. "Oh, come on, Renee. He's not gonna hurt you," Tammy kept reassuring her. The woman was desperately trying to scream words to myself and Tammy. She finally broke free from Tammy's grasp and mechanically sprinted down the hall. Tammy was swift after her, tackling her to the floor and crashing into the common room. The other patients watched in surprise. Tammy forcibly ripped the frightened patient to her feet, walking her back down the hall. She shoved her into the cell and slammed the door shut. "You can stay in there until you learn how to act in the common room," she screamed with fury to Renee. She slammed her hand 4 times on the door in clear anger. I had no idea what to do. I was frozen. I gulped as I watched the scene unfold. Tammy finally removed her attention from Renee, the disgruntled patient. "Ugh," she sighed out. "I'm sorry," she mumbled. I don't think I can do this," I said as I slowly turned my back to her and began to leave the building. "No, you can't leave," she said. "We desperately need the extra help around here, as you can see." Her voice still trembling with stress. I now hear the haunting screams of a deeper voice. The man in cell 10, also muffled by what I assume was a muzzle. I took a deep breath, followed by a long stretch of silence. "Come on, I can show you the games we play with some of the patients," she said with longing. "Okay," I finally broke. It may have had something to do with her attractiveness. Her face was the definition of perfect, and her body wasn't far behind. She smiled wide with my acceptance to the rest of the job. We made our way to the common room where the patients had still been dazzled by what they had seen. "Who wants to play house?" Tammy broke the silence with her question. Surprisingly, Jackson, Scar, Anne, and Kate all happily volunteered to join in on the game. The old man, Jackson, feebly rose his hand as if too afraid to ask a question. "Yes, Jackson?" Tammy questioned. Her voice held a tone that an adult would use with a toddler. Can I be the baby?" His raspy voice seeped out. "Well, of course you can, Jackson. You've already got your diapers on," she laughed. Jackson had a dopey-eyed smile on as he pulled his pants down to show us his shit-stained diapers. I instantly retracted on impulse. I gagged as the smell hit my nose. I almost puked all over him. "Kevin," Tammy shouted. "You can't act like that around the patients." "Oh look, now he's crying." The skinny man sobbed uncontrollably and finally ran to the other corner of the room to sulk. Tammy left in a huff after the man, picking up a spare diaper on the way. "Did baby Jackson make a poopy?" she said with a smile. He giggled and lifted his legs into the air. She stripped him and proceeded to change his diaper in the middle of the room. Once again, I was frozen in disbelief. I wanted to say something, but I couldn't. This couldn't be legal. I was disgusted to the point of nausea. Meanwhile, Scar was lying on his back, panting like a dog and kicking his legs in the air. "I'm the pooch, yo." He laughed hysterically. "Bark, bark." Tammy popped her head up from her disgusting duty. "Yes, you are, Rick. You're a good boy." "I'm Scar," he screamed. "Roof, roof, aroo." Jackson clapped his hands when Tammy was done changing his diaper. She slipped his pants back on and stood him to his feet. She quickly ran over to Scar and started rubbing his belly. He slapped his tongue out and rolled from side to side. "Rough, rough." Kate perked her eyes and exclaimed that she wanted to be the wife. "Wife?" Tammy questioned. "To me, that would make you a lesbian. You're not a lesbian, are you, Kate?" "No," Kate yelled. "I'm his wife," she said, pointing to me. I didn't know what to do. I looked to Tammy for guidance. She raised her eyebrows at me as if I should play along. Kate started walking towards me, a wide smile on her face. I stepped back a few feet and she finally reached me. Her arms coiled around me tightly and squeezed. My hands shook as she squeezed even harder. I glared at Tammy, waiting for her to do something about it. "She's just playing, Kevin," Tammy said with no concern. "Are you sure?" I hardly managed to squeeze out. Finally, Kate loosened her grasp and stood back. I took a breath in the momentary calmness. Her hands struck back up and clenched my face. She pulled my face towards hers. I twisted my body from her and shoved her away. Tammy quickly intervened and reprimanded Kate. I stormed out of the room, unable to process what was going on. I ended up sitting down in the front lobby, breathing heavily and staring out the front door. Looking back, I have no idea why I didn't walk out at that moment and just be done with it. Something told me to stay. I could distinctly hear Tammy's screams to the patients, sending them all back to their rooms, clearly angry with Kate's behavior. Finally, she came to the lobby, a fluster in her breath. I said the first words before she could say anything. "This is messed up," I said. "I seriously cannot do this shit." "Listen, Kevin, they are excited to see someone new in here and are just acting erratically. They are almost always calm and controllable," she tried to explain. "No, everything is messed up," I said. "You're playing house with a bunch of loonies and one of them wants to have sex with me." I defended my right of being upset. "You really should not refer to the patients like that," she said flatly. There was a long stretch of silence in the small lobby. "I think you should go home for the night and think about it," she said, "but I urge you to give it another shot tomorrow." I said nothing as I walked out the doors. The first thing I did when I got home was tell my dad about the events. I explained to him that I just couldn't do it. He insisted that I go back. "Come on, Kevin, don't make me look bad." Bob told me over and over again how they were struggling to find good workers around there. And here the man offers you $25 an hour and you just say you can't do it? Just please, for your father, go back tomorrow. I couldn't say no to the man. Noon the next day, right back at it. Tammy was glad I was back. She even cooked me lunch. A few thinly cut pieces of venison between 2 thick slices of white bread. It was worth it just coming back for that sandwich. "Damn, that was amazing," I said. "I haven't had venison since I was like 6. I forgot how good it tasted." "Thanks," she said with a half-laughing smile. The next few hours, Tammy and I just sat, talking, waiting for the common room time, talking about mindless stuff. Finally, she decided it was time to let the patients out. We walked down the winding hallways to the common room. She told me to wait there while she released all the patients. She was back shortly after, a flood of wackos behind her. Some of the quieter ones began playing checkers with each other, while the other livelier group came to Tammy and myself. "Have I ever told you I used to have 8 kimono dragons?" Scar chimed in. Names were Charlie, Bruce, Lil Terry, Big Terry, Sebastian. "Okay, who's ready to play house?" Tammy asked, cutting Scar off. They all jumped for excitement when she suggested it. It just creeps me out. Their facial expression chilled me. I just needed to leave the room. "Where's the bathroom, Tammy?" "Just down the hall past the cell rooms," she told me. I quickly left the room, jetting past the cell hallway, hearing the haunting muffled screams of the man in cell 10. Chills ran through my whole body. I finally made it to the bathroom. I didn't even have to go. I just sat on the toilet for about 10 minutes until I could gather my thoughts. I walked back down the halls slowly, not even really wanting to get back to the common room. The man had seemed to have stopped screaming. I got closer to the hall and my spine tingled. Before long, I was standing at the end of the long dead hallway, directly in front of cell 10. I was strangely curious, with the same longing feeling to look down when you're standing atop a towering ledge. I was staring at the pale white door. There was no sound whatsoever, no movement, no breathing, no screaming, nothing. I crouched down, slowly moving my face to the feeding slot, peeking through with my eyes. I could barely see anything, mostly shadows and an obstructed view from the feeding tray. I knelt down to try to get a better glance. As I repositioned myself, I noticed something on the floor just by the door frame, a small puddle of deep red blood pooling a few inches out from the door. I lost my breath. As I looked back up through the slot, I was staring at two bloodshed eyes split open in terror. I fell to my back, fear engulfing my body. My head slammed on the door of cell 9, directly across the hall from cell 10. I had forgot there was a patient in cell 9. That is, until she started screaming again. The man in cell 10 started slamming what I assumed was his face or hands against the door. I quickly scrambled to my feet and started making my way back to the common room to tell Tammy the patient was bleeding. At the end of the hall stood Kate. Her eyes pierced me. "Hello, husband," she said coldly. She started walking towards me with haste. I didn't even hesitate to burst by her. I slammed her body against the wall and ran the narrow hallways to the common room. Tammy was sitting on the couch with her back to me while the patients wandered, free to do whatever they like. "Are you even paying attention?" I screamed at her. "You've got crazy people all over the place and you're just sitting in here." My words were cut off from the shock of what I was seeing as I walked to the front side of the couch. Jackson laid on his side, his head over his lap, while he sucked on her exposed nipple. "What the hell is going on in here?" I screamed in disbelief. Tammy quickly jumped up, putting her breast back in her shirt. feed the baby," Jackson happily exclaimed. "He's just playing," Tammy pleaded. I shook my head in disgust. "I'm gonna tell Bob." "No, you can't," she screamed as she followed after me. I made it to Bob's office much quicker than she had, opening the door unannounced. He was sitting at his desk, the barrel of a pistol in his mouth. He looked at me with surprise and pulled it out of his mouth quickly. I was in shock. He quickly turned to anger. "Never interrupt me during my private time," his voice shaking in rage. His face turned red with fury as he stood from his desk. The photo of his medical license hung in contrast on the wall behind him. His calm, smiling face on the document seemed to mock him from behind. I looked at the photo with more focus. Dread seeped into my soul, for I came to realize the man in the photo on the wall and the man behind the desk were not the same people. My heart sank. At first, I had no idea what to do. I backed out of the office slowly until I came into contact with Tammy. She was hysterical and screaming that I not tell Bob. The intense skittishness of myself at the time caused me to backhand her with reactive fear. She fell to the ground instantly, the keys to the cell sliding across the hall. My gut wrenched as the gears in my head started turning, piecing together what I thought was happening. I snatched the keys and sprinted down the twisting halls, dodging the wandering dead-eyed patients. I went straight to cell number 10 and twisted the key in the door. My suspicions were confirmed when I saw the man, the same man from the photo in the office, Bob Conti. My stomach twisted and I nearly threw up when I realized what I had eaten earlier that day. He had multiple hunks of meat removed from his thigh, blood running down his legs and pooling on the ground. Before I could even react, I glanced down the long tight hallway to see Tammy, standing still with a petrifying twist in her eyes, a knife with dried blood dangling from her right hand. Her head tilted and a soul-killing smile crept across her face. I stepped away, my back hitting the dead-end wall. She moved with an inhuman speed towards me, the knife raised with intent. She hissed at me with a loudness of a frightened cat. I stumbled over my own feet and fell into the cell. She slammed the door shut and made chilling cackles of laughter. "Did someone get scared?" She giggled through the feeding slot. She jabbed the knife through the hole repeatedly, boisterously laughing with insanity. She finally walked away, leaving us locked in the room. I had the keys, but they served no purpose from inside the cell. I removed Bob's muzzle and he explained to me what had happened, and that the woman in cell 9, Renee, was the receptionist. There was nothing we could do. I spent the next 18 hours in that godforsaken cell, waiting for my death. I'm sure most of you are wondering about my father, and why I started this story off explaining that he died to save my life. When I didn't come home that night, he must have been extremely worried. He wanted to speak with Bob in person to see if he had heard from me, or knew where I may have gone. The man who had impersonated Bob shot and killed my father, but not before he called the police to let them know something was wrong. The man behind the desk died in a shootout with the police, and they had to use a blowtorch to open the doors to both cell 10 and cell 9. Renee was somewhat back to normal within the first year, but Bob never recovered. I don't think I have either. The police say there was never a woman in the building or around the area that matched the description of Tammy. It's been a year now. The reason I'm telling this story today is because last night I saw Tammy. There's no mistaking it. Her face has been burned into my mind. She was standing in front of my house, just staring with cold eyes. I have no idea how she could have found me. No explanation whatsoever. I'm in serious fear for my life. I've already contacted the police, and they will be keeping an eye on my house day and night. I cannot live my life with this perpetual fear. Number 5. You see, Majori and I are twins. Growing up, we did everything together. We wore the same outfits, had our hair done in the same braids, and we played with the same toys. We shared everything except our personalities. I was always much more social and extroverted than Majori, outshining her in school and other activities. She was quiet and often sank into the background while I performed and excelled, but it was undeniable that we cared about each other. I'm not sure you'll ever really know when someone you love is crazy, but with Majori, I can remember a distinct point at age 7 when I began to think something was unusual. We'd been going to bed and I was unable to find my favorite Cabbage Patch doll, which I had been sleeping with for years. When I finally saw her sun yellow hair under the toy chest, I grabbed her out excitedly, but screamed and recoiled when I saw that she had been shredded and dismembered, with deep scratches all across her eyes and mouth. I told my parents what Majori had done, and they chuckled in disbelief. That night, Majori whispered to me, "It will be our little secret." By the time we finished high school, not much had changed. If anything, we'd grown even more dramatically different. I'd been popular, invited by many boys to prom, and Majori had been distant, eating lunch alone and refusing to participate in anything. My parents didn't seem to care either way. They were there for us in whatever capacity we wanted to be. Majori simply didn't seem to want anything. We went to the same university and shared a dorm room. My freshman year was a blur of parties and drinking coupled with late night cram sessions. Majori said she was doing fine and enjoying herself, but sometimes I felt as if she was a bystander in her own life, doing very little and just watching. It was also my freshman year that I was raped. I had awoken from a weekend night and immediately knew something was wrong. I couldn't remember anything, except I was in incredible pain and saw bloodstains all across my clothes. When I looked up, Majori was tenderly smoothing my hair, saying, "It will be our little secret." That morning, they found the fraternity guy I had last remembered being with. He was stuffed in a dumpster, ripped apart limb by limb, with his eyes and mouth gouged by a deep pocket knife. My parents called me once the news of the murder spread, but I assured them we were fine. At 23, when I had gotten my first job, Majori had been living with me and working from home. On a day when I grabbed lunch with her, she saw why it had been so easy for me to get the job I had. My boss was a lurcherous creep and had been coming on to me for weeks since the hire. I didn't enjoy it, but I didn't want to ruin my budding career. That night, after another exhausting day of work, I could have sworn I heard Majori say through the bedroom wall, "It will be our little secret." The next morning, my boss was found under his desk in pieces, with his eyes and lips ripped apart. You need to understand, I was protecting her. I've always loved my sister. Last month, I was mugged on my way home. I had taken a shortcut late at night and was attacked by 2 thugs. When I came staggering home, bruised and beaten, in torn clothes, I knew what Majori would say before she even did. "It will be our little secret." That night, she hadn't been as careful as before. The cops are called, and when morning broke and 2 dead bodies laid strewn across our front lawn in pieces, eyes and mouths covered in hundreds of deep scratches. So now we're visiting her. I think they're trying to keep us safe from Majori, because they've kept me in a white padded room for a while now. I spoke to my parents about an hour ago. They keep telling me Majori was a stillborn. They must be truly distraught, and I hate having to look them in the eyes and say, this isn't the time for jokes. Before you go, I wanted to tell you about the giveaway I'm hosting. But first off, thanks for watching, and leave a like so I know you made it to the end of the video. Don't forget to subscribe because I upload new videos every week. My name is Chills, and I'm thanking you all for your support by giving away 3 $100 Amazon.com gift cards. It's completely free to enter, and you can enter the giveaway by visiting the link at the very bottom of the description. It doesn't matter when you're watching this video, because top15s.net/giveaway will automatically direct you to my most recent giveaway. See the terms and conditions on the linked page for full details. If you want to follow me on social media, my Twitter is at YT_chills, and my Instagram is at DylanIsChillinYT, with underscores instead of spaces. Feel free to send me a DM if you have any questions or suggestions. See ya.